Welcome to Temple Talk from Jerusalem, Israel. Rabbi Chaim and Richman here together with Yitzchak Reuven. Today is the third day of the month of Nisan. That's the month of redemption. Our sages said in Nisan we were redeemed, and in Nisan in the future we will be redeemed. Month of freedom, the month of Chirut. The third of Nisan, 5779, that is April 8th, 2019. And this Shabbat Hagadol, it's called the Great Sabbath, the Sabbath that precedes Passover, which will be next week. And the Shabbat, of course, Parshat Metzora, the fourth Torah portion in the book of Leviticus. Yitzchak Reuven, am I wrong? Is it not
I think it's the fifth.
There you go. Beginning in chapter 14, I was just testing you. Beginning in chapter 14 of Sefer Vayikra. Yitzchak and I were just talking before we began the program about how we feel that we are, to a certain extent, in some sort of post-traumatic stress syndrome or currently traumatic stress syndrome, and we are in the survival mode and that we have survived so far this election season. It's been a particularly difficult one. A lot of
Venom,
a lot of recrimination, a lot of accusations. It's you may say, so what? What does that have to do with the average citizen? Well, the average citizen is being bombarded with SMSs that must be illegal spam from every single party claiming to be each other, or claiming to be hurt by the other, or claiming to have inside information about the other, and much of it is fake news. And the individual vote is being fought over very, very aggressively. And of course, tomorrow is Election Day. We are recording Temple Talk today on this Monday, the 3rd of Nisan, April 8th, even though we generally record on Tuesday. But tomorrow, Tuesday, April 9th, here in Israel is Election Day. It's what you'd call a federal holiday. And if you come to work, you have to be paid 200%. That's the law. And so Yitzchak and I, of course, having mercy on our employer, we wouldn't want
Wait a minute.
Oh, I'm sorry, Yitzchak.
I'd be willing to do a 2-hour-long Temple Talk.
No, we're doing it today because tomorrow we're going to be busy. We're going to be very busy voting because it takes the whole day to vote.
You have to keep voting and then go back and vote
exactly.
again.
Polls are open from like 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. and we have to vote as many times as possible. Anyway, here's the thing. In Hebrew, a political party, is called a miflaga, and the root of that word is Pei Lamed Gimel, and it is an idea of divisionism, of separation.
Well, the Dor HaMiflaga.
Exactly, the Dor HaFlaga, right. This is what I wanted to speak about. The generation of dispersion is what we learned about in Sefer Bereshit, in the book of Genesis, when all of mankind was united for evil, and Hashem dispersed them. They were called the generation of dispersion. The connotation is of miflaga, of pilug, is vying factions, is separation. And here too, just thinking about like we said, the venom, the depth of animosity, the degradation of the social discourse of election campaigns. It's very, very miflagti, that is, of or pertaining to this whole headspace of
us against them,
divisionism. It's very, very hard and very, very painful because it's not what we want. It's not the vision of the prophets for the state of Israel. It's not reflective of the fact that there's a creator that everyone believes in, and that we have to follow his agenda. And in fact, people ask me, like, who are you voting for? Who should I vote for? I don't like to talk about that or give any advice whatsoever. I think that what has to be done here is that every single person has to remember there's a creator. That's the main thing in our lives. It's not a periphery thing. It's not like another factor in our lives. There is a creator. Yesh borei olam. There is a creator, and that's the only reality. And so what a person has to do in a time like this is decide which one of these woebegone misfits, clowns, retreads, tokens, cronies, or actually accomplished people that we think might actually have something to say. Which of them help me Hashem, which of them actually reflects for me the closest of how to advance the Creator's agenda in this world. That has to be the determination here, to graduate from the miflagtiyut of it, from the divisionism of it, from the separation of it, into a vision for the betterment of the state of Israel. It bothers me very much that everybody is doing this negative campaign. You know, that the campaigns are all based on mudslinging, basically, on each other, and as opposed to someone saying what I can do and what I want for the state of Israel and what I believe in, everybody is trying to discredit the other, and it's disappointing, because it has to be more of a positive experience. Anyway, I was listening to this beautiful lecture. I was sharing with Yitzchak this lecture a little bit earlier, where a rabbi was talking about the concept of the era of Mashiach ben Yosef and the concept of the era of Mashiach ben David. And last week, I remember we talked a little bit about how it's really time for Mashiach to come, and that's who we should be voting for, if possible. And that's who we're certainly waiting for, and not a narrow-minded party with a very specific and myopic political agenda. And that's really what bothers me the most, I think, about the election season, is that every single one of the parties, the miflagot, the separated divisionists, they all have their own particular priorities. They all have their own particular, very, very specific worldview, very narrow, except maybe for the one that I'm voting for. And they are all very very limited in their thinking. And who has the message for the entire nation? Who has the wherewithal, the will, the vision, the clarity, the decisiveness to hope for, to plan for, to include the entire nation in the redemptive process. Anyway, so we were listening to this wonderful lecture where basically the speaker was talking about the fact that the beginning of the history of the state of Israel, the first 70 years, and that's a biblical number, and we find in many instances the prophets speak about the significance of an era of an epic of 70 years. First 70 years is like the childhood. It's like the infancy of the state of Israel, and that is the era of like the Mashiach ben Yosef. We've spoken about that. The whole concept of the Yosefian process of redemption, which is a redemption through our own initiative. It's our own participation in the redemption. It's a physical process. It has to do with our work on a physical level to bring about the redemption. And that's one stage. And in that stage, there's a lot of criticism, and there's a lot of childish behavior in a way. But then the next stage of history that we're waiting for, that we're actually beginning, that we have begun, undoubtedly and universally agreed upon by the greatest sages, we have begun the period of Mashiach ben David, the period of redemption associated with the culmination of the process, the spiritual revolution, which is spearheaded by and attended to by and crowned over by the Mashiach of David. That is a spiritual process, and that already reflects spiritual maturity. It's no longer childhood. It's no longer, a state of spiritual immaturity. It is, it's being grown up. That's what the era of Mashiach ben David is all about, and that is like, you feel like the seam between the two realities, moving from the constricted, immature state of consciousness of childhood to being grown up, to the time of the revelation. And I'm thinking about that a lot because of the fact that candidates should be reflecting the agenda of the Almighty and not dwelling upon what each perceive to be the other's inadequacies or failings. Instead, what do you have to offer? What vision do you bring to the table to bring about the final redemption? And I think it's great. I think it's wonderful that this is taking place in the month of Nisan. That's the month of redemption. That's the month in which the Jewish people left Egypt. That's the month of spring. It's the first of all months. It's the beginning of time, but better time to initiate the next stage of the redemptive process, which obviously that's what this is. So we're going out to vote tomorrow. And I'm not giving Yitzchak 200% of any imagined salary because we were doing Temple Talk a day early. So there. Sorry.
Now you tell me.
Well.
Did you, Rabbi, make the bracha on 2 flowering fruit trees yet?
I haven't gotten a chance to do that yet.
I did that this morning in my own garden.
Wow.
Very, very special bracha, blessing that we make once during the year, and that's during the month of Nisan, preferably in the first half of the month before Passover begins, but it can be said all throughout the month. It can be said also in a diaspora, right, Rabbi? I noticed that there's a bracha, a blessing, but there's also sort of a lot of psalms and things you say before and different things, and one of them says, when may it be God's will that he'll bring us back to the land of Israel.
Right.
So from that, I kind of assume that it could be said also outside, but I don't know. It's a question.
We'll check that out.
Yeah. But anyway, it's a very, very beautiful concept. The actual blessing is thanking God for making a world in which nothing is lacking, in which everything that we need, God provides for us, including fruit trees and other wonderful aspects of life that we enjoy. And of course, it's so appropriate for the month of Nisan. What's the origin, Rabbi? Do you know the origin of this blessing?
It's a very ancient practice. It's actually mentioned by the earliest sages.
Mm-hmm. But I love the opportunity to say it. It's, there are blessings that you say every day, and there are blessings that you say whenever you do this or do that. And here's a blessing that you say once during the month of Nisan, which happens once a year. It's a very, very special opportunity to
acknowledge Hashem's providence in the world. That's really what, and that's a very Eretz Israeli kind of thing, because I think that in the diaspora there's a tendency to be a lot more immune to the realization of Hashem's constant presence in our lives. There is a certain kind of dullness, but in the land of Israel, because it's the palace of the king, because there's such an immediate cause and effect, because we're so connected to Hashem's revelation of his providence, because that's the way he deals with us here is differently than the way he deals with the rest of the world.
And did you notice, Rabbi, that this past Shabbat was Rosh Chodesh, Nisan, the first day of Nisan? Did you notice that we switched from winter to spring on that day?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was just beautiful. I mean, last week it was raining and cold and still wintry, and we loved every drop of rain that we got, and we still may get some. But since this Shabbat, it's just been beautiful spring weather. The flowers are blossoming, the birds are chirping, everything is beautiful.
Everything is getting ready for the ultimate redemption.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is getting ready for the exodus from Egypt. May we all merit to really get out of the narrow places, out of the house of bondage and slavery and the despotism of the Pharaoh that is over us, and may we really achieve true chirut, freedom. Yitzchak, this week,
message.
Parshat Metzora.
Mm-hmm.
We're still talking about the Metzora, the one who is afflicted with Tzarat, with this spiritual disease, as we spoke about last week. And in the Torah portion, our video last week in Parshat Tazria, we emphasized the unique, singular nature of this spiritual disease. and its connection to, even though this is not even alluded to except for the word itself, Metzora, Motzi Shem Ra, a person who brings forth a bad name on someone, not otherwise alluded to in the verses itself, but as a tradition, our understanding that there's a connection between this afflicted person. We were not calling him a leper because it's not leprosy. That's an inaccurate translation. Connection between the visitation of the disease and speaking ill of others, gossip, tale-bearing, slander, lashon hara, evil speech. If I understand correctly, at least according to one opinion, the way that it works is that first it would appear in the walls of someone's house, right? Which is what we learn about in this week's Torah portion of Metzora. It wasn't in Tazria. Then it would...
The first appearance is in the walls, not in the person.
Exactly. According to this interpretation, it doesn't go in order. It doesn't go in the order the way it's presented in the Parsha. There's no chronological order necessarily in the Torah itself. So let's say it appears in the walls of someone's houses. And then that gives the person the opportunity to engage in introspection, to repent, to try to clean up his act, to try to improve. And then if that doesn't work, if he didn't take it to heart, if he didn't change, then it's in the clothes, in his garments. And that gives him another opportunity to reflect soberly about how he's been acting. And then if that doesn't have an effect on the person, then it appears actually in his skin. In other words, these are concentric circles. According to this understanding of how it works, is that it starts off more as a warning bell. You know, you look around your room, it is in the walls of your house. And then if that doesn't work, it comes even closer to you. It's in your own surrounding lights of your garments. It's in that which is closest to you of all, the clothes that you wear. And then if that doesn't work, then it's in the body itself. Now, we're learning here about, and I'm skipping, in the beginning of the Parsha here, it talks about the stages of the purification of the Metzora, which is this unbelievable process with these two birds, and that one is slaughtered and dipped into the blood and then the live one is dipped into the blood, and then it's released upon the field. I mean, these are cosmic forces that we're rectifying here. The whole idea of the cedar wood and the hyssop, you know, his sin was one of arrogance and ga'ava, of conceit. That's represented by the cedar, which is the tall tree, and then the hyssop is a lowly plant that grows close to the ground. So, and of course, this is a process which is very, very similar to the process of the burning of the red heifer. The ingredients here, and the whole thing about the birds, and the one that's released upon the face of the field, is obviously we're dealing here with a realignment of the universe that this person has been connected with. But I want to talk about the whole idea here of the appearance of a blight, of an affliction, of Tzarat, of this biblical disease in the walls of a person's home. It's like absolutely incredible. Whoever heard of such a thing, you know? It's like there's no parallel to anything in the history of mankind to this idea, because again, we're not talking about the black mold that can appear in people's houses. You know, we're not talking about anything
Mildew.
Right. We're not talking about anything that is scientifically proven, relevant, or extant. You know, that we can compare this to. This is something miraculous that Hashem orchestrated specifically for the people of Israel in a specific time period when they were generally speaking, on such a high spiritual level that they were sensitive to correction, that they were sensitive to receiving this sign that he knew that it would have an effect on them. And it was like a tremendous blessing, actually. It was a tremendous blessing. And the sages speak about this a great deal. Maybe we'll go into this further in our video lesson this week, if there's actually a world left after Election Day. It's hard to imagine what's going to happen in 2 days when we're actually over this period. But if we're able to do a video this week, we need to investigate the whole concept of what it really means to see this in the walls of one's home. Now, you know, again, I find it irresistible in my mind not to try and associate what I'm learning about in these Torah portions to what's going on all around us, namely the extremely negative and I think improper tone of the election campaigns. How they're so focused on disqualifying the other and finding his fault in him and his personality, and it gets very personal and very, very dirty and very, very unfair. And if that's not a manifestation of the sins that these Torah portions are talking about, then I don't know what is. You know what I'm saying? These Torah portions are talking about improper use of the tongue and mudslinging and speaking ill. So I mean, it just so happens that the climax of this whole, difficult, vexing and depressing time period of coming up to the elections has coincided with these two Torah portions of Tazria, and now the election is actually in the portion of Metzora. Who would have ever heard of something like a manifestation of a spiritual disease on the walls of someone's house? It's totally unprecedented in the annals of human history. And the only thing that it could possibly remind me of, I was thinking, is the famous phrase in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, spoken by Mercutio, who said, "A plague on both your houses." Of course, in contemporary writing in the 20th century, it's been alluded to many times, but it's morphed into the word pox, a pox on both your houses. But actually, this is from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet in 1592, where Mercutio says, "I am hurt, a plague of both your houses, I am sped. Is he gone and hath nothing?" Now, the houses, of course, are those of the Montague and Capulet families, the feud between whom caused Juliet so much grief and was the source of her "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo" speech. But of course, that comes to mind, I'm thinking to myself, because this is basically what they're all saying to each other: a pox on your house. But of course, in Parshat Metzora, it actually is the plague of Tzarat on the house itself. So there. Awkward pause. There's some music, so I guess we'll be right back. I guess we have no choice, but we will be right back with Temple Talk.
Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven with Rabbi Chaim Richman here in Jerusalem, Israel. Today is the third day of the wonderful month of Nisan, 5779. It's the first of our months. A very beloved month. It's the 8th of April, 2019. This coming Shabbat, Parashat Metzora. And speaking of Nisan, Rabbi, every year, I think on the radio show, we talk about the 10 crowns of Nisan. And I don't think we talked about it this year, and I was trying to remember the 10 crowns on Shabbat, and I was faltering.
It's an ancient tradition. It's mentioned, cited in several of the earliest texts of the teachings of our sages, our rabbis. That the expression is that the new moon of Nisan, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, was crowned with 10 crowns. Before I explain about the 10 crowns, I want to mention the fact again that the sages talk about the fact that Nisan is like, why is everything bursting forth in beautiful blooming, beautiful eruption of the most wonderful spring
Colors, scents,
that was
sounds.
That was like dormant throughout the winter. It is the time of the validation of creation. Our sages explain the time that Hashem's plan for the whole reason why he brought creation into existence in the first place was actually realized, was actually fulfilled, because as we've learned over the years, the reason for creation is an expression in Hebrew that Hakadosh Baruch Hu Ratzah Dira B'Tachtonim. Hashem wanted a dwelling place in this world. He wanted to be welcomed into this world. He wanted to be welcomed by man, and that's the significance of the establishment of the tabernacle on the first day of Nisan, right? We talked about the 7-day inauguration period that we learned about, end of Tetzaveh, and then Parshat Shmini.
Mm-hmm.
And it was on the 8th day is the day of the completion of the 7th day inauguration period. That was the day that you're now asking about the 10 crowns.
Right.
But the reason that it was considered to be the fulfillment of the purpose of creation is because of one of these aspects of the 10 crowns. The day that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, was welcomed into this world is the day that creation was validated, because Hashem is saying, this is what I wanted. I wanted to be with you. I wanted to see that you wanted me too. Anyway, so this teaching that 10 crowns of Rosh Chodesh Nisan is the expression is about the 10 ornaments, as it were, the 10 beautifications, the 10 praises that are sung of the singularity, of the very special quality of this month, of the month of Nisan. So the 10 crowns are: number 1, the sanctuary in the wilderness was inaugurated on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So that is the first of the 10 crowns.
The tabernacle.
Right.
The inauguration.
Tabernacle. This is the day that, therefore, because the tabernacle was inaugurated, this is the day that's considered to be the completion of creation.
That's the second crown?
No,
that's the first crown.
I'm explaining why this is so important. Now, on the same day, Nachshon, the prince of the tribe of Judah, brought his offering.
Okay,
so
right.
That was the beginning of
We'll read about that in the Numbers.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the day that Aaron began his duties as high priest.
Right. So that's 3.
That's 3. This is the day that the first offerings were brought on behalf of the nation, first of the communal
4.
offerings. Then this is the day that fire came down from heaven atop the altar.
5.
This is the day that the portions of the korbanot, of the offerings, were eaten by the Kohanim within the designated areas of the holy place for them.
Okay.
So this is the beginning of the whole relationship of the Kohanim rectifying these forces through their participation in the offerings.
Okay, that's 6.
This is the day that the Shekhinah dwelt amongst the people.
Mm-hmm. That's 7.
This is the first day of Birkat Kohanim.
Right.
The first day that the Kohanim blessed the people of Israel with the priestly blessing that we find in the book of Numbers.
8.
From this day onward, it was henceforth forbidden to bring offerings to private altars, which had been until that time in the desert travels. In other words, this is the time of now the community is focused on the altar in the tabernacle.
9. And finally,
this is the first designation of Rosh Chodesh, of the day of Rosh Chodesh, was actually this day.
Well, there you go. 10 crowns. Very special day indeed. And this Rosh Hashanah, it is Rosh Hashanah, to tell you the truth. It is the new year, because it's the first of the months, and it's the beginning of the nation of Israel, etc., etc. But I was going to say that, well, you know what? I'm not going to say what I was going to say. Let's just move on.
All right.
I'm going to change the
Something
subject. I'm going to change the subject. Yeah, I'm going to change the subject slightly. Speaking of wonderful things, wonderful, bittersweet, I guess you could say. This past week, Israel, the entire nation, was really electrified by the news, sudden announcement that the body of a soldier who was missing in action for 37 years, one of the early battles of the First Lebanon War, the Battle of Sultan Yaqub, in which I think 30 Israeli soldiers were were killed or went missing. 3 soldiers were never, their bodies were never returned. And it's
So we're
ethos
talking about
of the army of the nation here that we don't rest until every one of our sons is brought home.
it's an amazing, amazing and moving event. This past Thursday night, the remains of Sergeant First Class Zachary Baumel were returned, and some of his personal effects as well.
Yeah.
Finally, after a what was described as a top secret operation, much of which has not yet been revealed, how the information was gathered. It was described as being very, very painstaking and arduous and difficult, very difficult process of identification, of sifting through information and verifying. And after many years of this painstaking, just torturous research, it was finally verified that this was in fact his remains, and it was apparently through the intervention and the active participation of Russia.
Let's just backtrack a little bit. The First Lebanon War, for those who aren't aware or weren't born yet, it was in 1981, 82 it began, and Israel went to war against the PLO, which was at that point residing in Lebanon and basically had created an independent state in southern Lebanon, which is the northern border of Israel, and had been bombing the northern towns of Israel for many months, I believe. You and I were here in the country at the time, and Israel attacked and entered into Lebanon and fought not just with the Lebanese, but with the Syrian army. And so in this battle, which was a very bloody battle, these bodies were taken by the PLO, and there were some prisoner exchanges after, but these bodies were never included, and Israel's been looking for them ever since. And these bodies have changed. The ownership, whatever, of these bodies has gone from one terrorist group to another, and the parents of Zachary Baumel, they waged a worldwide crusade to get their son's body back, and his father unfortunately died 10 years ago. He didn't get to see this. His mother's very elderly, I think maybe in her 80s, but she did get to see her son's body returned, as did his siblings, who were young kids at the time, and now they're not so young anymore. And eventually, somehow, Israel was able to pinpoint, apparently with 100% accuracy, where his remains were buried. But it was during the Syrian civil war, Israel was able to get this information and verify it. And at some point, ISIS was in control of this particular area, and then Syrian rebels. And I know that I read that Israel offered a reward, a monetary reward for the rebels who tried to find the bones. And I think the Syrian army, intervened at some point, and they weren't able. But now the Russian army is in this area, and thanks to the apparently very positive relationship between Netanyahu and Putin, Netanyahu brought this up, one of their many meetings that they've had over the past year or so. He said, we know exactly where his remains are to be found, and your army is sitting in that area right now. And Putin apparently agreed on the spot. And the Russians made the effort, and in fact, I've heard that they came under attack at one point.
Yes, according to what was released for publication, and in Putin's own words, his soldiers were risking their lives, and I think one of them was even shot.
Yeah.
And he said that did not in any way demur their efforts, and amazing, absolutely amazing. And Netanyahu and his entourage went to Moscow for altogether 4 hours last week to accompany the remains it was incredible.
And then there's a very moving ceremony here in Israel with the Russian ambassador and Russian soldiers in honor of Balmo. It was very, very beautiful and very moving. And, you talked about the division, the election season and all divisions. But something like this is something that, there's no division here in the heart of Israel.
That is the unifying and purifying power of the IDF, which is the People's Army. And it's something that is across the board and touches the heart of everyone. It was an amazing funeral. It was thousands of people. Very, very special experience, like you said, to see the extent that the state of Israel goes for every single soldier after almost 40 years. Yeah. And, I'm sure it was a tremendous amount of effort, untold expense, and a project that spanned literally decades. But it's really, again, like you say, especially at a time of divisionism the perceived animosity that is between parties. It's that animosity, whether it's perceived or genuine, is not between people. It's only between the political agendas of everyone vying for how they think things should be done. Mm-hmm. But the people really are united, and that's what I really was just to clarify what I was really trying to express earlier when we were talking about the different epochs of the epoch that is associated with the first stage of redemption, which is our physical participation, our physical initiative, that of the son of Joseph, the Messiah of Joseph, who is about the power of, building the state and the childhood of the state. And then there's a time when that goes over and morphs into the next stage of history, which is the spiritual revelation, that is the spiritual revolution that is orchestrated over by the Mashiach of the Davidic line, and that's more of the spiritual revolution. And that's also that is already about spiritual maturity. And no longer about criticism and mudslinging and I'm doing it better than you. It's about recognition of the value of the entire nation, of everyone's contribution. And that's the proper dialogue that we should be having for that time, which I hope is now. So, it's not a question of the spiritual maturity of the people, because the people really are there. The people really are so united in the highest place. Like I say, everyone has a different perception of what the agenda should be as far as the Creator is concerned. Even people that deny the Creator, even people that say that they don't believe, they really do in the deepest place in their hearts. That's what a Jew is.
So, division and unity, it's all here. And the interesting thing, after all the division and divisiveness that this campaign sows, after we have a coalition system here, a parliamentary system. So after the election results come in, there's no one party, and there rarely is. I mean, it hasn't been for 50 years, a single party who on its own gets more than 50% of the Knesset seats, therefore could, in theory, form a government on its own. No. And probably 30 seats, will be about tops, which is only 25% of the Knesset. So we have coalition talks as soon as the election is over. So you'll see all these politicians who were slinging mud at one another and saying that this person is totally unfit for this position. He couldn't even be a garbage collector, and nothing wrong with garbage collectors.
Right.
But they'll all be sitting together, trying to work out and offering very important ministries.
Exactly.
To this one
that one about whom it was said that he couldn't be a garbage collector will suddenly be the minister of who knows what.
Right, and he probably still couldn't be a garbage collector.
By the way, I really must insist that we clarify our position about garbage collectors. That we have nothing against them, and not only that, but they're here in Israel extremely highly paid. In fact, I once had a student who really wanted to be a garbage collector, and he couldn't get in because he didn't know the right people. So it's not at all,
No disparagement there.
No.
But the point is, next week they'll all be moochie poochie. and saying lovely things about one another, and leaving all the rest of us scratching our heads.
Hopefully leading us into the next era of history.
Earlier, Rabbi, we checked our calendars and realized that next Monday will be the 10th day of Nisan. And why is that such an important day? Because in the 10th day of Nisan, while Israel was still in Egypt and had just received the commandment to begin to account the month of Nisan as the first of our months, and begin to take the calendar under our own for our own responsibility, we're told, because on the 10th day is when we need to go out and get a lamb.
It's right
every
here,
family.
Right here in chapter 12 of the book of Exodus, Parashat,
which we read this past Shabbat.
Speak to the entire assembly of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month they shall take for themselves each man a lamb or kid for each father's house, a lamb or kid for the household. And even though the offering of the Passover lamb in Egypt was on the afternoon of the 14th, which is the eve of Passover, the lamb was taken into the house 4 days before.
Right.
And that year, the year of the Exodus, the 10th of the month was actually a Shabbat. And that's why, it's one of the reasons why this Shabbat is referred to as Shabbat HaGadol, the great Sabbath. And it's an allusion to the great miracle of the fact that the whole house of Israel brought this lamb, which was like a deity sacred to the Egyptians, into the home, and the Egyptians were dumbfounded and tongue-tied, and they weren't able to stand up to the otzma, the holy audacity of the Jewish people who were prepared to slaughter the idolatry of the Egyptians before their very eyes.
Do you think that having the lamb, and they say that the lamb was actually tied to the bedposts in the houses for 4 days. Do you think that having the lamb in the house for 4 days was sort of like the last straw? Like, that's it, we got to get out of here? Like, that was God's way of really revving the people up to get in gear? And
I have my own thought about this that I've shared in the past. The idea of when it's really time to act for Hashem, and it's really time to move, when you're really being called on the carpet, which we all are at different times in our lives, to make a stand, to make a commitment, to express our commitment. There's no rehearsal, and there's no way out. There's no exit. You can't shirk your responsibility, and it's a teaching of our sages. It's not even alluded to in the verse itself. It's a teaching of our sages that, because the verse just says to bring the lamb into the house, to take for themselves. But our sages explained that it was actually taken and tied to the bedpost. So it was kind of there, like right in your face.
Yeah.
You look into these deep, almost human-like eyes of the lamb, and it's like, this is it. This is the confrontation. This is the moment of truth. And my understanding of it is like, what the sages are really telling us in the deepest way is like such a deep idea is that, when you want to get away from it all, you want to just hide from the world. You go into your bed and you cover yourself. You pull the covers over your head and like, leave me alone. Stay, keep the world out. But like Hashem is saying, like, no, bring the lamb to your bed and tie it there, so that even when you're trying to pretend that this isn't happening and you don't have responsibilities in me, you don't have responsibility to stand up and destroy the idolatry of the world in front of everyone and admit that you believe only in me, I am like destroying your comfort zone. In the one place that you think that you could escape and just take a load off and just try to relax. No, this is real. I am with you everywhere, all the time. You cannot escape me. I am your God. If you want to leave Egypt, if you want that I should be for you a God, then you take responsibility for your mission, which is to take this lamb and slaughter it.
And I would think that during those 4 days, as you're lying in bed, looking into the eyes of this lamb, that you're also taking a measure of your own humanity. I mean, the lamb's a beautiful animal, but you're a human being. And are you going to do what's necessary in order to separate yourself from the animal, which they talk about with this is a lesson of all the offerings, but it's very, very visceral in this example that, are you going to do what's necessary to clean out the animal from your bedroom.
That's why Passover is the festival of freedom, because it's all about this total graduation into what it really means to be a servant of Hashem. And it's freedom isn't about personal liberty and about the ability to do what you want. It's the ability to be able to make the right choice.
Mm-hmm. And to act on it. And
that's what Passover really is all about.
And that's what Nisan and spring is all about. And, all the preparations we make for Passover, which we're already in the middle of, have a long way to go. It's all about action, doing what's necessary to get ready and be where you need to be when the time comes. Thanks for being with us. Temple Talk.